No Code Lab was formed this year, and it was in response to my experience of working with other technology companies that were in this space, and realizing that all of us were struggling a little bit to help the business community, the investment community, the digital community to understand what no code was, what it was about, and how it could drive value, innovation, digital change, diversity, inclusion, and lots of agenda items. And the reason that the no-code community probably doesn't have that profile here in the UK is because it's actually quite a new wave and a new movement. So we established this really as a forum for bringing lots of different interested parties together to educate, inform, and also collaborate and enable no-code businesses to come together to work together to create digital change. More on that later. So no code is all about accessibility. It's about the power to create change fast. So to deliver value into digital transformation projects by giving people without technical skills the technology to build those solutions to those problems for themselves without dependency on developers or technical teams. There are also solutions that are designed to be deployed really quickly. So it's not just about whether you need the skills to use them. This is about fast creation of solutions, digital solutions to problems. It's about decentralizing some of that power from a technology point of view within organizations. And it's about giving more people the keys to creating digital solutions to problems. So you'll hear the phrase citizen developers. In my world, because we have a data analytics company called Pan Intelligence that's a no-code solution, we talk a lot about citizen data scientists. But what we really mean here is it's individuals, but not necessarily technologists, being able to build the digital solutions of the future. And the four main pillars that we've built the foundations of the No-Code Lab around is seeing that no-code isn't just about digital transformation, innovation, and change, but it has an opportunity to do lots of other things that the digital sector actually has been working towards for a number of years. Because we don't need to have the same level of technical skills in order to adopt no-code solutions to drive change, it enables us to bridge that digital skills gap. It means that we can give more people the opportunity to participate without having the education to do so. It accelerates innovation, fundamentally because it allows for a faster creation of solutions to problems. Accessibility to digital solutions and data as a result of lowering that kind of barrier to entry also enables greater accessibility to perhaps groups that don't currently use digital in dealing with their day-to-day. And as a result of lowering those barriers to entry for technology, we are opening up the opportunity to extend diversity and allow for inclusion. A big challenge for the tech sector, we still have a poor track record when it comes to gender inclusion and inclusivity across a number of areas. And I think no-code has the power to be an enabler of transforming that. And timing is everything. So why did we do it this year? Well, what we've seen is that the Google trend data is showing very clearly in this slide that the use of the terminology around no-code is just going up rapidly. This is due to an adoption of the language into a way of describing solutions like ours and others that are part of this community. That said, no-code isn't necessarily new, and there are tools like Access, which is a database technology, or WordPress, which is a website technology, which in of themselves are in effect no-code solutions. So whilst this is a booming language, it doesn't mean that this is something that is completely new and therefore high risk. And the investment is on the rise as well. So you'll have seen that tech investment is growing increasingly or being seen as an attractive investment, sustainable investment for many portfolio investors. But also no-code we're starting to receive some of that interest. In fact, Uncork hit a huge valuation only last month for its solution. So there's been a sharp spike. One of the best examples, like I say, would be with Uncork. I think it was 207 million in its Series C that it raised. And the coronavirus has also accelerated some of the adoption of no-code in the need to rapidly pivot or generate new digital solutions to some of the challenges that people have been facing during this period. So we're hoping to not only educate, but sort of own the conversation around this. Like I said, Georgia was mentioning earlier to the panel that we were doing some advisory work with the DCMS and Tech UK, just to make sure that no code is part of the digital agenda, and that there's a recognition for its place to drive some of these changes that we've talked about today. So no code's place in the future of tech investment is one of our events that is about the future of. We also run events around Heroes, or kind of Hero series, which is showcasing really great no-code projects and how they're driving change in organisations. But today we're here to talk about the future of tech investment. And I'm going to welcome you to our panellists. So I'm just going to stop my screen sharing and hopefully be able to see all my wonderful guests on the screen. Firstly, I'm going to welcome Helen Oldham. So Helen is one of the founding board members of North Invest, which is a not-for-profit early stage investor business backed by the Northern Powerhouse and the UKBAA. Hopefully I've got that right, Helen. North Invest connects startups to fund or funding startups to help North achieve its potential in the tech sector. Get my words out if I can. Helen has an extensive background starting in PR, moving into strong leadership roles. She's currently chair and founding trustee of SmartWorks charity. She's founder of Fund Her North, a fantastic initiative that I was delighted to be involved with at the launch last month. And she's on the member of the board of Maggie's Yorkshire and the founder of Grow and Thrive. So thank you, Helen, for joining us today. Will, I'd like to, sorry, Helen, we're going to say hello.
Say thank you and hello.
Sorry, apologies. Will, I'll introduce you next. Will is the last of the I put the last of the investment powerhouses, but I think we've got Ed to go on to, yeah, but we'll come on to Will first. So the last of the investment powerhouse to join is Will, or the second. Will is an investment manager at Mercia Asset Management PLC. Mercia is a proactive specialist asset manager focused on supporting regional businesses to achieve their growth aspirations. They have a keen eye for tech and know what it takes to get things off the ground. Will has been at Mercia now for 2 years. I think he was also involved in North Invest in the early days. So there's it's been a while since these guys apparently have spoken. So it's lovely to join you on an event today. And you're tasked with identifying key opportunities for growth in the Northern Powerhouse Investment Fund, Will. So glad you're here with us today, Will.
Thanks so much for having me.
Pleasure. Ed, you are the last of our investment powerhouses. I'll give you the right title. You're listed on my bit of paper actually as one of the brightest minds in tech investment. Ed,
wow.
It's aspirational title, right? Very aspirational title. Ed is a tech investment banker for being GP Bullhound. GP Bullhound is a leading technology advisory and investment firm with deep expertise in all things tech. Their global team provide best-in-class advice in a full range of M&A and fundraising transactions. They invest capital in some of the best entrepreneurs and founders. Worldwide clients include Spotify, Klarna, and Vito. Ed has just under 10 years experience in investment banking with some of the biggest names in the industry. So thank you very much, Ed, for being with us today.
Thank you very much for having us. Excited to be here.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm really delighted to join two other no-code community partners who are doing amazing jobs at kind of sharing, educating and collecting the community together, both from the other side of the pond to the rest of the delegates on the panel today. So Christian Pavarelli, welcome. Nice to see you today. I see you've got your big boom mic again, suits you. Christian is the founder of We Are No Code. They empower non-technical founders and businesses with no-code technology and education. Another one of our guests that has extensive background in founding businesses and in leadership. I think, Christian, you've been founder and director of, in 4 of your last 7 roles, you've been a founder or director of, I think. You've done this quite a few times before, so you know exactly how to make startups work. So you come at it from a business and a community perspective, it's fair to say. So happy to have you on board, Christian. Thank you for today.
Thanks, Sandra. Thanks for putting this on as well.
It's a pleasure. And last but no means Lacey. I think Lacey was the first to arrive and the last to be introduced, so thank you, Lacey. Another guest from the other side of the Atlantic from Texas. So welcome. Has been running a Women in No Code for the last 5 months. So she has a real affinity for the possibility that no code holds from a diversity and inclusion point of view. In a role, she also provides resources, tutorials for this community to foster the growth of women in visual development. So thank you very, very much, everybody. I think also, Lacey, I've forgotten to say, I think you run a podcast. Is it called Visual Dev FM that you run?
Yeah. So Visual Dev Co. is the company I have with 2 co-founders,
and Visual Dev FM is the podcast out of that.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I think there's lots of connections that we'll make after this. And Christy and Lacey, I would encourage you to drop into the chat and the feed any links to some of the things that you guys do for anybody that's on this call to join and connect into. So thank you very much, everybody. So on to the main part of the session, which is really a very open panel discussion. And I think there's probably quite a few people on the event today that probably don't completely understand what we mean by no code. I think it'd be awesome if we could start with just a quick few words from probably Lacey and Christian, if that's okay, on if you were to give your simple definition of no code, what would that be for everybody? Christian, would you like to start?
I believe ladies go first. Lacey, would you like to start? I'm happy to go.
Sure, absolutely. So I describe no code as a set of tools that provide solutions. So no code is not trying to take the place of code. Obviously, it's an abstraction of code. So no code is a set of tools. They are builders. So website, automation, mobile app, web app, that kind of encompasses, my definition of it's just a tool set.
Yeah, absolutely. I use a similar way. I mean, I think that me and Lacey try to find different ways of explaining it so that people can understand it properly. When we talk about no-code tools, it really just comes down to two things. Tools that you can use for business automation and tools that you can use for building software. And so when we talk about the software building part of it, it's really about talking about experiences where you would be designing on something like PowerPoint, adding the logic of what you would already do in something like Excel, and in that way being able to build software that would have the code behind it, but where you weren't necessarily writing out those individual lines of code or having to understand sort of coding language to be able to adapt it. So sometimes that looks like a drag and drop experience. Sometimes it looks like a Photoshop kind of a designer experience where you have the two sort of and there are a number of different tools. I think that there's been a little bit lost in translation because no code has become very hype. So it's being thrown around by a lot of different startups. If someone says that they started a no code email platform, well, every no code email platform has always been no code. But yes, you can consider that no code because you don't have to learn how to code to use it. So that's kind of the overall thing. I'm sure we can get into some more details about no code.
That's awesome. Thank you both. I suppose I was interested in sort of extending that question for a second, if I may just stay with that, which is, what do you think the main drivers are that's sort of pushing this movement? So obviously there's explosion of language around this, but it's not that new. But why do you think now is the moment? What's causing that?
Yeah, I think the market is just really ready for it. I think once people realize, like we had, no code tools in and of themselves aren't necessarily new. Like you could argue that, and I do think it is, like Microsoft Excel is a no code tool. Like it's a database. But I think that as we've gone on, like WordPress was a really big explosion in that you can manage your website without pulling in your dev team. And then it just kind of built on top of that. And so now that we see, okay, we have so few people in the industry who know how to code, like by population, like I think it's less than 1%. So that leaves out like the majority of the world who don't have a technical background, but they may have an idea, or they may be able to pick up these tools and iterate within their workplace, their operational stack. And so I think it spread like wildfire because people are suddenly empowered. They can suddenly go and create solutions to their problems. And it's the greatest thing because it's just seeing all these people pick up these tools and suddenly they're building and they're able to create the change that they want to see. And I think that it's so positive that it's just, we're seeing it pop up everywhere now.
Yeah, I completely agree with everything that Lacey just said. And I would add there's a couple of things that kind of make it the right time. First of all, the development of the no-code tools themselves. When we talk about no-code, primarily, or at least the geeky people talking about it, we're talking about basically the evolution after sort of Shopify and these kind of, where you could, create, or Squarespace, where you could create websites, and now it extended to this whole new range of possibilities. I think that there were two factors that, so first of all, the maturity of the tools themselves. You know, basically to be able, you know, there was a lot of hype about no code a long time ago as a promise, but then what it was actually able to deliver was really only possible about a year or 2 years ago. And I mean, we were building, and I'm sure Lacing was as well, like 6 years ago with Webflow and other no-code tools that were less developed at the time. So maturity of the tools. The second thing I'd say is coronavirus. Basically, people have been, there have been two things that have happened. People have been forced to do less with more and have had to lay off employees because they simply can't maintain their business. So turning to automation tools is kind of like a clear go-to. And then I'd say also in the tech space, at least in the entrepreneurship space, which is kind of where I come from, startup land, there's been a maturity in terms of the place at which people invest, right? Like the cost of building a startup has never been as low. No code is probably the third big frontier that we've crossed after sort of open source and cloud, to allow sort of anyone to really be able to build something for a couple $1,000s, even with no code, a couple $100s. And I think that, you know, in parallel to that, we've seen that the investment markets have, you know, a lot of, let's say that the LPs, who are the investors of the investors, if you know, a lot of you are familiar with those, I'm just defining that for the audience, have, you know, there's been a study done that showed that basically in Silicon Valley, a lot of people were not getting returns. And so that forced sort of a bit more maturity in that market too, where it's like, okay, well, if we're, you know, we need to invest larger amounts in fewer deals that are a little bit more mature. And so there was a little bit more of a shift towards, and this I was seeing through accelerators as well, like you need 3 to 6 months traction or revenue to be able to expect or be at a phase at which you're ready for investment. So I think it's kind of forced people at the early stage to figure out how to build a whole company and reach revenue before even approaching investors. And no-code tools are kind of a great way to get there. So those are kind of three trends that I've seen.
Thank you, Christian. I think both of you, that's a really great start to sort of landing the conversation in a place that helps the rest of the panel to perhaps look into their own experiences over the last year, to maybe think about perhaps some of those deals that they've seen cross their desk and the opportunities that they've been working on, to just get an understanding of what really, from your perspective, Helen, Ed and Will, have been that maybe the barriers to understanding some of these opportunities, or what are the things that you've seen from your point of view that have really helped you to sort of get it engaged with this. Helen, you've unmuted. Would you like to start?
Yeah, so just to be really clear with everybody in the audience, North Invest is a very early stage angel investor network. So we're talking about individual investors here, of which around 30% have some kind of tech knowledge or expertise. But despite the fact that there's only 30% of them in the network, they often tend to be the lead investor. And will have quite an influential role in investment decisions as they go through the pipeline. So when I was asked to speak on the panel, first of all, I was so excited to be initiated into the cult of no code. So I'm kind of seeing today as being part of my own education experience, but it has made me look very closely at pipeline and where we see no code playing out in the very early stage investment world. The first thing is we haven't actually so far actually provided some investment to a pure no code play, which is interesting in itself. And I'll come on to that in a second. Where we have seen no code playing out is quite often in MVPs, in actually providing tools that are being used for market testing. And as Christian said, are actually proving that there's a revenue model, that there's a market there, there's a consumer who's interested in this product. But typically, an angel investor, and in the UK, those are quite often male 50+ guys. When you look at the overall network of investors in the UK, they're looking for IP, they're looking for something that's defensible and unique, and that in their minds, no code is not always going to meet that requirement. Now, my challenge out to this group is that's an educational opportunity, isn't it? Because I can see in the UK, in the US, there have been a growing number of investments made in no code. I just think that the visibility of those is not yet here in the UK, and particularly in the very early stage.
That's brilliant, Helen. Thank you. I was just unmuting and missing the unmute button. No, that's a really good starting point. I don't know, maybe it would be good to go over to Will, actually, because we're sort of going through the stages of investment from angel through to perhaps a sort of Series A raise where you might find yourself, Will.
Sorry, it's telling me I'm muted.
No, you're fine. We can hear you.
Fine. Okay. All right. So for Mercia, we do start and we do a range up into Series A and BCT. So I was actually having a think about it before jumping on this, and I think no code is almost a requirement for most of the investments that we do. And I was looking down in terms of how the customer experiences it, because otherwise you're automatically, unless you're providing something really, truly, clever, like a Splunk, if you will, if you don't have that strong customer base, it's going to be a lot harder to sell it. And it just makes the hurdle to sell the product so much higher. So I was going through the examples of what I'm currently looking after at the moment. I think almost all of them, no code is a key feature for their offering is the fact that they are delivering their functionality in a way that now you don't need someone who has a skill set that's increasingly expensive and not available. So I would say one of the main examples, one of the first investments I did when I joined Mercia was called Slingshot Simulations, which is taking simulation software, which is traditionally quite complex and inaccessible, and a big part of it is delivering that functionality to SMEs and businesses and making it accessible, so that the guy who runs the warehouse and has 20 years of experience in his head knows how to articulate it, can now play with the data and show his team and his company what he's visualizing, and also test things. And I would say the other big aspect of no code in my mind is that concept of play, because what it means is that all of the users then have the ability to play with the data or whatever it is in that format. And then that opens up creativity, communication, testing, trial and error, if all of a sudden you've got 50 people that can play with it versus 1 or 2. And I think that, that just kind of creates a nice cycle of innovation.
Thanks, Will. And I think that's a really interesting sort of going from the kind of seed stage, angel stage of MVP and how that enables people to understand the value, the opportunity, the use cases and the test cases in probably Helen's portfolio world to that sort of validated product, but at the same time being easy enough to use that you're not giving yourself a barrier to adoption as you look into that scale up phase. Feels like different sides of the no code value, if that was fair to say. One is about enabling sort of idea initiation and proof of concept, and the other is enabling that scale up and usability for end users. Hopefully I summarised that right. But I'm just wondering then, if we go on from there to Ed, actually, you've got these scaling businesses, they're starting to get some repeatability in their models. Where does no code feature in what you guys are doing, and how do you see that driving value?
Yeah, it's a really interesting point, because I suppose if you look at the US versus Europe, it's clear to see that the US is at an earlier stage developing many more kind of pure no-code companies. Where we're really seeing it the most is on the larger enterprise scale. And what many large enterprises are doing is they're actually looking to buy and bolt on these features to their feature set to allow their already large user base to use these no-code tools. So to give one example, Unity Technologies, which is a very large gaming engine, it's up there with kind of Epic on the West Coast battling it out. They're spending a lot of time and a lot of money acquiring businesses which have got aspects of no-code to them, but not pure no-code businesses. It's almost, they're buying the tool sets and the engines to allow a no-code interface for Unity and Epic, it's particularly in building games, to allow this kind of drag and drop method that Christian mentioned. And it's really about making their user base, its life, already easier than it was. So I think that's where we're seeing it the most. Kind of looking at the earlier stage side of things in the UK, there are a few businesses that are coming up, but I definitely also echo Helen's point. There's not much pure kind of earlier stage angel money going into pure low-code, no-code businesses that we're seeing at the moment. But that will, of course, increase over time, I'm sure.
And maybe if we just stay with you, Ed, for a minute, Ed, what do you think the no-code community is doing to inhibit? Because I do wonder sometimes, is this a language thing? Is this an education thing? Or are there other aspects around scalability, sustainability? I don't know. But where do you see some of the challenges? I think Helen made some valuable points. I wonder what your thoughts were.
In terms from a corporate side or from an investment side, I guess would be my question.
I think if we start with investment, you know, where would investors be concerned perhaps when it comes to looking at no-code investment opportunities?
I think it's a really interesting question, and it's also, investors like to hunt in packs is kind of an easy way to look at it. So firstly, they like to know what they're investing in, and I think there's a very small subset of UK investors or European investors that would really class themselves as kind of low-code, no-code experts. So I think knowledge is kind of a fundamental barrier. So that I'd say from an investment point of view. From a corporate side of view, I'm not really sure if there are many inhibitors. It would be, you know, thinking about why people would use no-code, low-code, you'd want to do it. I mean, to echo Christian's point again around kind of COVID and, you know, people having to, you know, losing staff, it's a really good way of maybe reshoring skills that historically, you know, were offshored in the UK. So what I really like about low-code, no-code is the way that it opens up the market to actually allow the people that aren't able to code to build these great platforms. And from an investor point of view, I'm actually really excited about the future in kind of the next 5-10 years, purely because what you're doing is you're opening up software creation to a subset of people that historically haven't been able to do that. So that was a roundabout way of saying I don't think there should be any inhibitors. Maybe we're just not shouting about it enough.
Thanks,
Maybe I
Ed.
can. I mean, there's something that's going on that I've seen at least. There's a very big distinction between sort of companies that are built with no-code tools and companies that are no-code tools. I think that the companies that are no-code tools and that provide the ability for other people to become makers are very exciting to the likes of certain investment criteria, right? So when you talk about a VC, they have a specific sort of model and a thirst for risk, but also a need for returns to be able to turn over their fund. So for those, this model will make sort of a lot of sense to invest in. And I think that there's kind of a shift now where people at the earlier stage who, you know, maybe are like early stage and angel investors, or maybe more, you know, investors with an appetite for less risky investments, but more sort of stable returns, are looking to also invest in these companies that are built with no code, because it basically proves that, you know, they're very lean, they're revenue generating, and they provide kind of like a better, and so it really just depends as an investment company, like what kind of investments do you make? What I see often here in the United States is that everyone tries to play like a VC, and it's like, well, you can't expect a company to be already, you know, like really mature if you invest, if you're investing, you know, $25,000 as an individual angel. But it's interesting. Then there's, you know, what Helen mentions is kind of like angel syndicates. That's also a different dynamic. So I think there's just at least platforms that are built with no code. I think there's going to be a new sort of class, let's put it. And I think that basically every sort of SMB is going to be built with no code in the future, because that just, it's, you know, it makes sense. And let's face it, not everyone needs to raise capital. I think there's also this addiction to like these headlines of like raising hundreds of millions of dollars. And the reality is that like a lot of people, what their dream of entrepreneurship is building a $10 million a year company. In many cases, VCs are not going to be interested in that, or at least if you're staying at that range. So I think it's just about understanding that it's really about risk reward, and that different investors like to invest with different sort of appetites for risk or not. So that's kind of like my experience in that field.
I think you made a really brilliant point around that kind of difference between tech-enabled and no-code tech-enabled organisations and companies that are no-code companies, essentially, the makers of no-code solutions. And then there's so I just wondered, actually, I think that was probably a useful point to bring out. No-code isn't just about the platforms. It's also about how the adoption of that in organisations. And again, thinking about people's interests, whether they are portfolio interests or just within their network. I mean, how many of us really understand to what extent no code is enabling innovation within organizations? Because that's something slightly different. And I think there's been a lot of conversation, certainly over the last few months when we've been involved in some of the other events that we've run around shadow IT and governance, and ensuring that we enable the use of no code in enterprises to enable that from a digital transformation point of view inside organizations. I just wondered if anybody had any sort of thoughts on what some of the key challenges are for understanding that, but also for driving that. I know we've talked about this, Christy and Lacey, on the last event, and like I said to Lacey, it might feel a bit like Groundhog Day from the event we were at, but I just wondered if everybody understood what I meant by that, and whether anybody's got any thoughts I'd like to share. Lacey, I just wondered if, just thinking about the adoption of no code in organisations, and just thinking about your community and diversity and the accessibility and what that does for sort of citizen developers, as we call them. What are you seeing in enabling those that broader range of people in organisations, and what are the barriers still, whether it's from an individual point of view or an organisational point of view? If you're okay to share something.
Yeah. So it's funny, I actually did a talk that recorded that was airing the same time as this was going, and it was about how no code and low code tools enable teams to move faster, because no code, like, we look at it from like a startup perspective, but I think it's highly underrated in an operations perspective because it is ubiquitous. It can fall for marketing teams, for product, for operations, and everywhere in between. And so what it does is that it allows teams and individuals to, like, going back to creating their own solutions. So they're not having to pull on dev resources. They're not having to go through all of these hoops to validate an idea or to put something in place that allows them to do their best work and to do it more efficiently. Like, automation is hugely important, thinking of how many rote tasks we do with our work that is really unnecessary, that we can really automate. And these tools, especially like Coda, is a tool that's excellent for teams. And the reason for that is it brings everything under one roof. So your product can happen in there, your dev roles, DevOps, what's happening over there. It can all live, and then notify on Slack of updates or whatever it is, bringing it all in. And giving your teams that autonomy to do their best work and not inhibit them. Probably the biggest thing that I see in that when I'm working with different teams are security concerns, depending on what the data that they're pushing through. There are some tools that are more advanced. There are some tools that I would just say, like, they're not there, like in my sessions with these teams, but we still have a way as far as like leveling the playing field for all the tools to be secure. There are some that are already there, like Zapier is a very safe, secure tool. There's another one called Knack that really isn't talked about that much, that definitely focuses more on businesses and teams, that is compliant. And so that's kind of where I'm seeing these tools need to grow. And we talk a lot about like scalability and all those things, and those are valid concerns, but really those are valid to like startup world, not necessarily to, you know, like business ops and those sort of things on the initial go round. So yeah, but absolutely, like no code is so suitable for businesses and teams, that's what I love about how versatile it is. It's not just for startups, it's for everyone. So it's really exciting.
Because there is a sort of a lot of conversation. Hopefully you can still hear me because I'm getting a little bit of a wobble on my internet. Good, okay. I do think there's quite a lot of confusion, I would suggest, around, you know, whether no-code tools are appropriate for businesses that are scaling, whether they are secure. But like you said, I think you gave some great examples of Zapier and others, Zapier and others. I think we pronounce it slightly different in different parts of the world. That actually are proving that really isn't a barrier, and I'm just wondering how we help. You know, when I think about the investment community, risk always springs to mind as being an area that comes up, and how do we ensure that people understand, or which are the tools that really are compliant, or have some kind of standard that just gives us a badge. Do we have a plan for that really as a community, and where would we go to? I think would be the question that I would have for ourselves really. Where would be that frame of reference? I just wondered, Christian, do you have a sort of, you know, where would be who are your go-to resources or experts in this field, or how would you give somebody an answer to that question?
I need you to reiterate the question, because I think that I was thinking, I wanted to address the topic of cybersecurity, and just to kind of like layer on to Lacey. But essentially,
please do that.
Yeah, maybe I'll just layer a quick thing and then you can reiterate the question and we can go in that. One thing people forget, and it's constantly like, oh, like, but will this thing scale to 100 million people? It's like right now, if you're a founder, early stage, that's not your problem. And if you ever have that problem, you're in a great spot. So don't worry about it right now. And then the other thing is kind of with cybersecurity. It's like, guess what? Even if you're building with developers and you have like 2 developers working on building your MVP, they're not going to be building this with like hyper, cybersecurity in mind first. They're going to be trying to like actually solve someone's problem and create. So I'd say that like you're actually much safer working with some of these no-code platforms where they're, you know, constantly going through penetration tests and cybersecurity audits to be able to make sure for themselves, but also because they have the responsibility of people who are working within their platform. So I'd say, yeah, that's like just, it's just a worry, you know. Could you reiterate your other question, Sandra, please?
It's fine. I love the fact you were thinking about what to talk about and you were in that world. That's wonderful. I love it.
That's pretty much what we're all doing here.
Yeah,
you know, we're just thinking, should I speak? Should I unmute myself? Is this going to be awkward? Yeah.
Just do it. Just unmute and ask the question. The question I had was, who would be your go-to person, organization, group of people to kind of validate, you know, these no-code tools? Because it's kind of hard, isn't it? Because it feels a little bit like the Wild West from the outside looking in. There's no code.
Yeah, I'd say, have a chat with someone like Lacey or myself who run communities and are focused on education. And we're going to be able to guide you towards like, you know, because usually we just find people who are just like, no code, it's so overwhelming. There are thousands of tools. I have no idea what I'm talking about. And so people like me and Lacey, like we focus on like going into every single one of these tools. And like, if we're not ourselves becoming professional, we're like, you know, we're at least getting a very deep understanding what the platform is possible of. But also we understand, you know, timelines. Like, you know, not all no code tools are made equal. We always like, we don't teach, we are no code. We don't teach any platform that basically we don't feel like it has longevity. So if it's not going to be around in 4 years, it's like a coding language. Why would you teach that to people? Then community is there a level of support where when that platform releases new features, you're not just left hanging, because and so I'd say, like, if you're looking to get into this kind of space, or even to understand how you can leverage it, and by the way, every single person can leverage it. All my VC friends in Los Angeles use certain amount of no-code tools within their stack to be able to deal with pipeline. Like, that stuff's a nightmare. And if you and some of the some of the tools out there, I won't name the one that we were using because I used to run an accelerator program, but it's just unmanageable to be able to get people to. So using some of these no-code tools can be very useful for everyone. It's just about figuring out what are you trying to accomplish, and then what set of tools are going to be best fit for your use case. And that's things that people who have experience in this no-code space, like Lacey, will be able to guide you towards those things. So it's first about just figuring out, like, what is what, and understanding, okay, do I need to hire someone for this? Do I have the resources? Or do I have the time to learn it myself and kind of empower myself? Those are kind of the things we deal with probably on a day-to-day. I'm sure you probably get the same thing, Lacey, right?
Yeah, a lot. Talking through which tools are viable, and then, like, I kind of have a stack of tools that I'm like, these are battle tested. These are my go-to. And as new tools are emerging constantly in this space, I look at them, but until they're a little bit older, until they've gone through a bit of a proving ground, they're excellent and wonderful, but I just can't lean on them for reliability like I can some of my other ones that are a bit older and more advanced.
So basically, you've got two people that should be part of any DD that you do on any deal, quite frankly, if you're looking at at no-code tools. And I think goes without saying it, these guys are deeply immersed in this space. And at the No-Code Lab, we are at the early stages of our journey. I think we're trying to gather the community, educate, start the conversation. And it's so important that we have people like Christian and Lacey involved too, because that's just further along that journey, as we find other parts of the world often are in certain areas. So we're playing a little bit of catch up. I think I'm interested to really go back to the investors on the call. I think, and my question that strikes me is how important is it that when you're looking at a solution to a problem that is being presented to you, that is a completely proven MVP? Helen, that's probably more for you as a question, as in, is this something that is incredibly important, and is it okay for us to be upfront, hey, this is all built on no code, and be really okay about that? Because I think there's a nervousness probably for people building with no code tools, that they kind of have to hide that away somehow. I just wondered what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, so again, in our network, we do see a strong appetite for pre-revenue startups. So around 50% of the startups that come towards us and we support, are at that very early stage where they still need to build their MVP sometimes, and that's what the investment's all around. And they're buying in that sort of angel expertise and thinking and support to help them on that journey. And in that area, as I said before, I think no code has played quite a big role in actually helping to shape up the fully formed project. So the solutions that we typically see, if it is revenue generative, is definitely not a no code solution, but there may be elements of no code within it. I heard you talking about the differentiating between those two things, and I think that's quite important. But I'm super interested in hearing more about the democratization that no code provides, and that opportunity to support diversity. I think that's a very strong sort of golden thread that could actually help galvanize the investment community a little bit more around this space. And the other thing I would call out is that we just need a few more examples of businesses that have landed investment using no code, whether that's either of the two business example models that we talked about, whether that's pure play no code or no code enabled platforms or opportunities.
I think that's great, because I think that's what these communities are all about, right? Is trying to showcase some of those, and the No Code Hero series that we run is all about trying to surface some of those stories, and not just from the perspective of the technology, but as much from the perspective of the value that has driven for the organisation, and also the individual stories. I think something Christian and Lacey we talked about on the 2DR event last week was actually having the stories of the people as opposed to just the stories of the technology. And actually it is about individuals that are often solving problems, and it's hearing what it was like for them and how easy they found it and what it enabled them to achieve. So I think we do have a job as a community to try and surface stories of people, not just of technology, and it's a little bit of a change of the dialogue that I think will help Helen, your community, who at the end of the day are individual investors at the end, you know, they're individuals themselves. I think that person to person dialogue is something that we've got some work to do on. Fair to say, Christine and Lacey, that was really summary of what we talked about. So I'm going to stop asking questions actually, and I was interested for us to sort of be a little bit more of a discussion. I wondered what, if anybody had any particular questions, perhaps Will, Ed, Helen, for Lacey and Christian, and things that are sort of front of your mind that you'd like to.
I can kick off. So I suppose if you look at the later stage of kind of businesses, if we're thinking of companies which have grown to a certain size and potentially someone would invest in them, one of the concerns that I'd often hear about is businesses which are using no-code, low-code tools, kind of which are critical to their infrastructure, but not actually owning them themselves, just using it as another product. So as an investor, I would be worried that what if the business that I'm building or investing in, all of a sudden that code isn't available the next day because I haven't built those. I don't own the IP of the code base. Is that something you've come across or kind of have any thoughts on?
Yeah, definitely. And it's interesting that you brought it up. So it's kind of in the same vein of, well, if I build out my MVP in no code, and then if I go and I need, extreme scalability, am I going to have to rebuild the whole thing? And it's kind of the same vein of, yes, because software is constantly a version upon a version upon a version. Not always with that you'll have to rebuild, but if you are that profitable, then yes, you would rebuild, but you would have something magnificent to give to your dev team that eliminates the majority of the back and forth and the questions and should we do this, should we do this? So that accelerates it further. As far as owning the IP, I think there are aspects of that could be troublesome down the line. Like, what if these tools just evaporate and they're gone and then there goes your product? But a lot of them have plans in place that are going to allow you to take your product off of their platform and self-host it and then work with a development team. It's definitely something that as founders are kind of coming into the space looking like, how do I build? What do I look at? That is definitely something that should be top of mind is, you can make like a contractual agreement, but you should always know how to get out of it and set bumpers up for yourself to be able to leave should you need to. So definitely something that founders and investors need to be aware of with these tools, but I wouldn't say that it's there's a chance, but I would say it's a low chance.
Yeah, and some companies actually allow you to extract all your code immediately, the entire code base. So you can be building something in like an hour, like a full thing, and then you can just extract all the code, migrate that to an AWS server, host it yourself, done. Like, what? Like, that doesn't make sense. It basically means that every developer should be using this as well to build out all, like a minimum of 50% of the technology. And why? Because also when you work with these no-code tools, you have much cleaner code. You're not dependent on every single individual line of code being written right. And then if there's 1 0 that's not there, suddenly you have, a whole part of the infrastructure that doesn't work. It's like that just seems like it should not be the way that we go about things. And I think that custom coding is really going to, basically, no code is not going to replace development, but it is going to take away some, the job of certain mediocre developers. And it's gonna frankly allow developers to also do more exciting work, because all the developers I know, these people are hyper intelligent. They're like hungry to work on super complex projects, and guess what they're doing? Like the Facebook login. It's like, oh, great. And they spend, and so it's like, you know, and you look at these massive tech companies and they're all working on the same stuff. Like you literally have 75% of all these massive companies putting their resources towards things. Of course, they have massive stacks, which have other problems at that point. And so I think it has to do with phasing. You know, what Lacey talked about, first of all, these no-code tools now are more scalable than ever. And that's only going to go more and more in this direction. And then when it comes to the code base, it's like when you build on these platforms, you own the IP. You just you know, it's your code base. And so for certain companies, you'll build it, and their promise, they have it in their sort of in their terms and conditions, is like, if anything happens to our platform, we'll allow you to extract all your code. They'd like to keep you in their environment, but they won't. You know, you won't crash with them if anything were to happen. But these guys are around to stay. You know. Like all these people are raising a lot of money, and yeah, I would say that that's probably less of a concern. It's so funny because there's a difference. Like, you know, Lacey might agree with me that there's such a big difference because of a lack of education in terms of what the actual issues are and what people are worried about. It's just huge difference. You know, everyone comes back and it's like, oh, what about cybersecurity? What about IP? Will I have to change off this platform? And then when you actually dig a little bit deeper into the use case, you're like, well, right now, this is 100% your best option. And I think as individuals, we're always just trying to analyze different options and just figuring out like, which way should I go and what are the implications of that way? Yeah, so that might be something important to understand.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valuable point, isn't it? It's about, you know, what's right for the problem that's in front of us today, and trying to sometimes think of every possible outcome isn't helping us to actually solve the immediate problem, which actually, if we just get on with it and do something quickly, is probably better off for doing than thinking about everything that we might go wrong. And I think that's part of the problem in no code, right? That is the.
And it's also the biggest problem in entrepreneurship. I can't tell you how many entrepreneurs I see out there, brilliant people who spend their entire, you know, year and a half trying to build a startup. But what are they doing? They're like doing research, putting together business plans, you know, like making their pitch deck look real slick, you know, trying to figure out how to do their financial forecast before actually building a company. And it's like, well, guess what? If you actually spent the time driving value for customers and then you approach investors like Helen, you're like, hey, look, I had zero technical skills, but I was able to learn this platform, build this platform, you know, generate $100,000 in revenue over the past 6 months. And now we're looking for money to be able to like invest in these areas of our, maybe rebuilding the platform, let's say, or just investing in growth. Helen's going to be like, oh, well, you know, that's something I'm interested in looking at, you know? And so I think that's another thing, like we really underestimate how much really like founders do, how much people are investing in your track record and in yourself. Obviously, you know, there's then going to be different things about market sizing, and that comes back to kind of like an investment thesis. But yeah.
Thanks, Christian. That's awesome. And it probably gives me a chance for a little bit of a plug for an event that we're running in December, if I'm being honest with you. We're launching something called, it's something called the Launchpad, and it's for no-code tools to collaborate in an online sandbox. And what we're going to do is take briefs from organisations that wouldn't normally get access to investment or funding, and so not-for-profit, third sector, charity, so on, or maybe parts of our economy which are underserved by just generally technical skills, to put in a brief, and the no-code software parties will provide free, obviously technology as a given, but actually provide time to help give them a bit of support to bring often multiple no-code solutions together to create an end-to-end offering that can be an MVP that they can take back out and look for either those first use cases to prove it out and validate or get some feedback, or even actually to initially get some customers and drive some revenue to build out an investment case. And for me, there's a really important part of trying to bring people along this journey by helping them to not just learn as we're doing today, but experience. And I think that's something, you know, Lacey, you and Christian are doing, especially you, Lacey. I think you're very much, you know, hands-on with these tools and helping to support people to understand the how easy it is to pick these things up and do things with them, but actually organising and making sure that this is made available to not just the usual suspects and enterprises and corporates, but actually we're seeing the parts of the community that perhaps wouldn't even know that no-code tools exist, that they can start to take the benefit of that. So I just wanted a small plug, and that's in December, and we're launching that, and that's going to be working with a number of international no-code partners, not just in the UK, to make that happen. I do have a question, actually, a couple of questions from people that are watching the event at the moment. If I can just bring one question up. One's for the investor community, actually, and I think it's for a bit self-interested for me, because it's a question that actually serves me and my business. So thinking about the technology investments that you're making at the moment, if they're data or AI enabled, does that matter? Are they more likely to receive investment? And we talked about data and citizen data scientists being the other side of the no-code conversation, because there's a lot of tools collecting data, but if we don't enable people to actually draw those insights out, then actually we might miss part of the value. So it was just a question for, you know, Will, Ed, Helen. If you want to go for it, Will.
Yeah, sure. Yes, I think, you know, if you do have elements of, you know, true AI or true, you know, real machine learning, then yes, that's absolutely a value add. I just would caution that, you know, AI is a term that gets thrown around a lot. And so just be careful that, you know, whatever you're using, use the correct label, because it's not going to make you look good if you're using the wrong one. And know sort of get your value expectations right associated with the different levels within it. So that would be my advice on that. But definitely, if you're able to incorporate it, there's certainly value to be had there.
Just to piggyback off that, I completely agree, Will. I was laughing because a few years ago, it seemed that blockchain or everything was ledger enabled on every single deck that I saw. And then I think kind of 18 months ago, 2 years ago, everything was pivoted from being blockchain enabled to AI and machine learning enabled. So I think it's clear. And I think the other thing to note is that a few years ago, you may have got away with it, but now the investor community is a lot cleverer in what is pure AI or machine learning. So expect to be able to demonstrate the elements of your platform that are using them, because just saying it or putting it as point 2 on a bullet point of a pitch deck is not going to cut it anymore, I'm afraid.
Yeah, and I would just building on that, I would say there's no shame in building on some other tool that exists and creating value from that. I think, you know, you can build great solutions that incorporate other elements of that, as with, you know, whether it's an AI from someone else within that, and that can be a great solution. Just be aware of what's the value that you're then adding, and because that's what's going to be associated with your company, not that AI element necessarily, because that's someone else's. But if you're able to use that and package something for a customer set, that's great, and run with it and scale it, and that there can be great value built there.
I love that, Will, because it's like people kind of just think, oh, and AI enabled. Oh my God, how many startups have you seen AI enabled? And then you're like, oh, where are you getting your data points from? They're like, what do you mean? And you're like, okay, never mind. We're done here. No, but I think people fundamentally don't really understand it, and don't understand that you need large amounts of data and that you need to create these models. And in the end of the day, what you said, Will, which is so on point, is the fact that these are just to increase the value. It's just about making it better at doing things. But the core value, you don't necessarily need to build out AI to be able to do that. And I think that's kind of something that's important. Like in no code right now, yeah, you can actually build AI models now and bring them into no code full stack. So you could do the whole thing now and connect them via API with an API connector. You know, so that's all built with no code. Now, of course, you know, there's certain limits. That's basically limited to, I guess right now, a company called Pilterion, and a connection it has with another platform called Bubble. And I'm not sure if Adalo allows it yet, probably not. But essentially, we're getting to those points. And there's also so much that has been built out there. And I'll give you a good example of a platform that we built just to kind of teach people tools, where we used Vision's API from Google to be able to do visual recognition. We didn't have to build out that entire technology ourselves. We just leveraged it, pulled it into the stack, used it to do what we needed it to do. And so you don't always have to build things from scratch to be able to get the ends you're trying to get to. But yeah, in many cases, when people talk about AI, I'm like, well, if you need a custom algorithm, you might want to build that with a data scientist, and then you can pull that into the no-code stack and leverage that within. So, you know, it's just, when we talk about no-code, it's very exclusive because it kind of has no at the beginning of it. But really what it is just the range from doing things with zero code to having low code, some code, to having full code. And I think that in the future, all stacks are going to have a range of those things. In the same way that as a company scales, you know, different revenue models and business models make sense at launch and at scale. So it's kind of like, I see that like most companies will probably start with no code stacks because it's so cheap and it's easy to prove the model. And you can really quickly understand, okay, am I targeting the right customer or not? And then you can basically, as soon as you figured that out, which is probably the place where people, you know, waste the most time, or not waste, but spend the most time. And then you can, you know, it's very much about staging. And I think that people just try to skip steps because they, you know, they read, frankly, they just read headlines that say, you know, the 16 slide pitch deck that these two kids used to raise like $47 million. And it was like talking about like bricks. I'm like, what are you talking about? Like, there's just so much behind that story that's not being said. Like the fact that they were winning hackathons at 10 and 8, and that they were, you know, and that they built a company in Brazil called Pagar Me that processed over $1 billion. And the headline of this whole article is just like, oh, Brex, these two young guys raising so much money with a nice pitch deck. No wonder people are getting the wrong idea of entrepreneurship, you know?
Thanks, Christian. And it does make me feel that the sort of the AI conversation and the sort of the buzzword factor, I don't know if we can call it a buzzword factor, but that we're in danger in the no-code community of sort of falling foul to perhaps a little bit of that, and making sure that we help to educate people in what is no-code, and make sure that when they are putting it in their pitch decks, that no-code, low-code blend is visible and transparent, and people are using the right language to express it, so that we do the community a favour and don't harm what is actually a really potentially transformative digital movement, quite frankly, from a lot of areas. So it was an interesting question. So thank you, whoever raised that. There was another question from Ankit Sharma. So thank you, Ankit. Generally, there are generally are no code tools today for specific industries or purposes. If so, are there any more prevalent in particular ones? So basically, are we seeing an emergence in particular sectors or areas? I wondered if anybody wants to jump in on that.
I've seen it quite a bit come up in marketing. I spoke with a marketing team not long ago, and how they could utilize no code, especially in social media, content management. So many tools have APIs that they can tap into and automate so much of their workflow. And so I've seen it, of course, in product as well, especially with rapid prototyping with real data. And so I think we're going to just see it more and more, and obviously in operations as well. Anything that can be automated in your hiring process and your updating of policies and procedures, those sort of things. A lot of these tools can handle that and automate it for them. But definitely in marketing, I'm seeing a big boom in it right now.
I see quite a bit in sort of operations and payments as well. So, you know, just the easy one to look at is, you know, Shopify and CRM systems that are getting much more user-friendly and moving from being, you know, that have taken a lot of cues from MailChimp, for example, and just making themselves a lot more user-friendly, so that you don't need to have a team in the back that makes the whole thing work.
I don't know, Ed, if you're seeing a particular sector that's predominantly pushing this kind of new no-code technology in their pitch decks towards you at the moment.
No, to be honest, I'm not, because I'm seeing kind of dealing with later stage stuff to do kind of pure low code, no code. I'm not really seeing too much of that. It's more kind of, as I said earlier, kind of large enterprise plays which are incorporating elements of no code, low code, particularly in kind of marketing, payments, and just other divisions, for instance, rather than kind of pure low code, no code.
So what's next then? Has anyone got a crystal ball? Where's the innovation going to come from? And are we seeing, you know, Lacey, Christian, you're probably quite close to some of the emergent no-code tools. Are they in particular areas?
You know, I'm seeing a lot, especially with women in no-code. We have a mix of founders who are creating no-code tools for the community, for makers, and then we see, or I see a lot of women creating off of these tools. And so it's really interesting. I'm seeing a lot around web apps, a lot around forms. People are looking at these, you know, larger companies and like tech companies like Typeform, for example, and kind of reconstructing the way that that forms are built. You know, leaving like Google Forms, which is a free tool, but you know, an ugly one at best, and kind of going in a different direction. A lot of focus, interestingly, on UI and UX to make it an experience rather than just something you have to use. I'm really seeing a lot of people focus on that, trying to learn more about it, especially if they don't come from a design background, because they're realizing that they may have built something cool, but if it's not appealing to their users, they're not going to stick. And so I think the bar is being raised for sophistication in that area, and that's definitely a trend that I enjoy seeing and love kind of helping people work through.
Oh, sorry.
Very well.
I was just going to add that another area that I think, you know, whether it's next or something later, but I think there's going to be a real evolution in design and planning. So I think as digital twins become more of a reality, I think a lot of that will come out in a no-code tool format. I think that, you know, they have to, because otherwise, you know, you'll create such a bottleneck. So I think, and I mentioned it previously, that the concept of play, all of a sudden, I think if they're able to succeed in doing that, you're going to have a lot more people able to interact with data the same way we can interact with the pen and paper, which I think, you know, there's a lot of doors that open if those tools are able to come to fruition in the near term.
Thanks, Will. And I'm also really mindful of just how much ground we've covered and how many areas of the conversation we've gone through today. And I know Lacey, you have to jump off in a few minutes. So I think I was just going to sort of bring this to a close, really, and just ask everybody for a sort of a final closing remark. I think, Christine, you did this to me at the 2DR event, and I can't even remember what I said now, but I think it was the one sort of closing thought. I think, you know, from the investment community, if there's one piece of advice, maybe, you know, not on that kind of don't do what we did in AI. I don't know, but it'd be really good to know if you had a closing remark. And Lacey and Christian, if there was just one closing comment, and then we'll wrap up and for the evening. Can we start with Helen, perhaps?
Yeah, so good question, Zandra. I think the key thing for the angel investor sector is just about knowledge, profile, and education. And the more we can provide them with some examples of successful companies that have scaled with a no-code element, the more that's going to empower them to take that risk. I definitely see the early wins as being platforms that do use pure play AI, which, and using the proper definitions as Will and Ed have alluded to. But I think that's probably the low-hanging fruit. And then beyond that, I think there is some work to do.
Thanks. Will, do you want to jump in? That's brilliant. Cheers, Helen.
Sorry. I'll just be honest. Could you I didn't catch all of your question. My internet cut out for a second.
No, it's all right. It was just a closing remark, Will, just a thought that you wanted to leave as we sort of come to wrap up the session.
Yeah, I guess from an investor perspective, I would say, just I guess reiterating almost what Christian said early on in the process, that the best thing from an investor perspective is to find a way to move forward, to connect with your customer and prove that there's a demand to fulfill. And if that's on no code platforms, that's great. Don't worry about the scalability of it, and that if you can articulate that there's value to be had in building it, then we're interested in it. You don't need to build anything from scratch if you don't have to. And in many ways, it's much better, because then as an investor, we can get involved sooner and help build value with you sooner. And that, that's a win-win.
Cheers, Will. And then maybe Ed, Lacey, so you can jump off, and Christian after that.
Sure. So first of all, thank you for hosting this. I think this is kind of a really important step. I mean, for me, if I look at kind of the whole ecosystem, it's really about bridging technology gaps. So you're in the whole low code, no code, you're enabling people who previously haven't been able to code to create these great software businesses. I think maybe a comment just on the investment side. I think we're currently in an arms race. So I think we're going to see a lot of money going in to kind of the larger kind of no-code, low-code platforms. And I think there's going to be more money that follows the successes, which is kind of an obvious comment. But I also am quite interested to, over the next few years, to start seeing these large strategic acquisitions, because once these big platforms have a user base and kind of, they've built a clear, market that they specialize in, they're going to become targets for the big boys on the West Coast and elsewhere that are going to look to, ultimately acquire them, I would suggest.
Yeah, definitely. And thank you so much for having all of us together. I guess my piece of, parting advice would be twofold. One, to investors of especially looking at products built with no-code tools. No-code really does de-risk an investment in allowing it to gain traction early and quickly, and to have revenue and feedback and iteration to then later give a product or a dev team a revenue generating high fidelity product that they can then go and develop and scale. And if you've ever built software before, you can know that takes you from, step one in the process almost down to the end where you're just essentially iterating on something that is fully functioning. It's a much quicker way to a scalable product if that's what that you're looking to do. And then also, if you're interested in the whole no-code space and getting involved, becoming part of a community is really important to help you build, to help you learn, whether you're looking to do a startup or just implement it within your own company and operations and automations and things. It's really a great community to be a part of. It's very welcoming, and we would love to have you. So.
Thanks, Lacey. And if you would like to jump off, because I know you've sort of fit us into your busy schedule and you have another event going live at the same time, please do jump off. And thank you ever so much for joining us. It's a brilliant contribution today. So if you want to jump off, that's great. And Christian, so just a final comment from you.
Okay, how long do I have? Is 45 minutes okay? No.
Yeah, it's fine.
sorry for speaking a lot during this panel. I get very passionate about this topic, as you can see. I think I'll take the opportunity to kind of talk about some of these different stories, because I think I think stories are kind of some of the things that really get people to understand the relevance of this. So we could start with a story where I basically was running this no-code event in a local VC here in Los Angeles, and I invited this panelist who's a very good no-coder. No-coder is the term we use for people who develop using no-code tools, and he basically had this slide. And for me, that slide kind of said everything. And it was basically, I used to clean pools. I discovered this no-code tool. I became like a web designer. And now I'm head of UX UI for like a tech company in Santa Monica. So the ability to pick up these tools and to really like, and to run with them can, first of all, change lives, change careers. The next one would be probably the story of Danny, who quit her job, no plan B, and she built this company called Scribbly, content marketing platform, kind of like a SaaS. And she was able to scale it up to about $30,000 in monthly recurring revenue within 18 months from no tech skills, no startup skills at all. So that shows you kind of like the small possibilities when it comes to like building your own business. And then we're seeing more and more companies like Dividend Finance is a company that was built with a no-code tool called Bubble. They raised $365 million. Now they're a lot more low-code than no-code. You have other companies like Comet, who raised $13 million. You have others like Follow Up Edge that are doing $30,000 in monthly recurring revenue. I think the point here is that no code can be used for everyone almost. So, and it's a movement. This thing is not going away. It's simply a natural evolution of building products and automation. And so right now people have a choice. Are you going to do the same thing as I did 20 years ago when coding started becoming the most relevant skill and miss out on it? Or are you going to get involved and start and get ahead of it and leverage these things? Because right now it's a competitive advantage. In 15 years, it's going to be in every school. I'll just put it that simply, essentially. This is just called visual development. It's not exclusive. Developers should be learning it too. And yeah, my mission is We Are No Code is to be able to connect people and their goals and teach them these tools, the set of tools that are relevant to them. And right now we have a focus specifically on startup founders in the very early stage, but we're also getting into small, medium business automation. And so there's, why wouldn't you stop doing all those mundane tasks that you do every day and increase your productivity, have more time to do other things in your life? And as a business owner, if spending a couple $1,000s per employee to upskill them with some of these things means that you can triple their productivity. So who doesn't want that, right? It's kind of like there's a lot of misunderstanding. We're at the beginning phase. It's normal. Everything that's sort of novel, people sort of at first a little bit are hesitant with, and now we're getting a stage of maturity where it has to be taken seriously. So yeah, thank you so much for having me, and reach out to me on LinkedIn or at We Are No Code as well if you'd like to have a chat.
Christian, it was an awesome wrap up. I'm not surprised that you had 3 fantastic individual stories, which was something Helen wanted, and we need to do more of that. And in fact, we've got an individual story from last week where we had TAP, which is a no-code tool, with Intertech, which is a FTSE 250 business, a very large organisation, talking about a no-code story. So if you want to watch that back, there's a really real-life example of a no-code technology being used in a very large organisation, and they've actually launched 100 apps with that platform over a very short period of time internally to do sort of transformational change around their operations. So do take a look at that and listen back. But thank you very much. I think that's been an incredibly insightful first sort of investment roundtable. We would like to run more of these, and we'll be scheduling another one in next year to make sure that we continue this conversation around the future of tech investment, and maybe talk a few more projects that we've seen actually be invested and why, and then hopefully we'll see a little bit more of that happening. But thank you very much to all of you. It's a movement. It's not a moment. This isn't a flash in the pan. We are not blockchain in that regard, and we're going to do a better job of positioning it than AI did, and we're going to get it right, and we're going to make a real change with this. And I think with your support as the investment community, engaging in this and being in these events, we can work together to make sure that this really does have the impact it can have. So thank you all. Have a really fantastic morning, Christian, and evening to the rest of you. And we'll do a roundup and circulate that for everybody who's both on this call, but for anyone that hasn't been able to join us today.